So here we are, the final Triton serial, the final of Season 6 and the final Black and White serial. We are at last of a 10-episode epic, the War Games. We've got a lot to talk about here, with a considerable cast, a large number of locations and factions, and that final episode which changes everything. So let's get into this serial and find out, is the War Games too long for its own good, or is this an epic worthy of praise? So let's get a bit of the serial's history out of the way first and explain why it exists. So originally the season was meant to end with 2 serials, a 4-episode serial and a 6-episode serial, but these were ultimately pulled. The 6-episode serial was originally meant to be The Laird of McCrimmon by writing team Mervyn Haseman and Henry Lincoln. This would have seen the return of the Great Intelligence and presumably its final defeat, but due to the copyright dispute between the BBC and the writers concerning the Quarks, the script was abandoned by them and they had left the BBC and the show behind them. This serial would have written out Jamie, although that had yet to be made certain, with Fraser Hines later choosing to remain alongside Patrick Troughton until the end of the season. The other serial was meant to be written by Derek Sherwin, but the script wasn't coming together, and with him taking over as producer, he turned to Terence Dix and asked him to write a 10-episode serial, but due to the massive length and the time frame, Dix asked if he could get help from his friend Malcolm Hook, who had previously co-written the Season 4 serial The Faceless Ones. Together the two of them set to work on the second longest serial in the show's history, but perhaps one that's even more ambitious. So let's get into the plot itself and really get this serial going. We begin with one of the best landing scenes of the TARDIS. It's very unique, with it immediately showing the high standard of the location filming for the serial. There was a lot of location work in this story, with the majority of it in its first few episodes. This immediate use of location filming really gets the serial off to a strong start, as it really makes the serial feel large and expensive. So the trio have landed in the middle of the Great War, specifically during 1917, although the German soldiers do wear the helmets with spikes that were phased out the previous year, although the serial does kind of give an explanation for this. This is where the trio meet 2 of the leads from the supporting cast. First we have Lady Jennifer, who is a nurse and ambulance driver, then shortly after, Lieutenant Carstairs, who is a British officer. The 2 of them are very strong characters, but I'll talk about them when I discuss all the characters at the end, otherwise I'll give away a lot of the serial's twists. With these 2 introduced, the trio are taken to the trenches, which causes problems for the commanding officer, who is willing to take them at face value until they try and make for the TARDIS, which just so happens to be towards enemy lines. With this they are believed to be spies and so are taken to British headquarters to meet General Smythe and stand trial. The first half of the episode is quite simplistic, a very traditional historical setup, but it doesn't take long for the serial to play its hand and show the audience what is really going on. We have several scenes where characters have hazy memories, notably about how long they've been on the front lines for, but the big thing that shows this isn't just a historical is when General Smythe is in his room and removes a picture to reveal a monitor which he uses to communicate through, requesting at least 5,000 more men, referring to them as specimens. This is a clear anachronism, but the fact that it's being used by one of the generals in the war makes it even more noteworthy, as it means that something is going on involving Smythe. These oddities continue as we get into the trio's trial, with the facts being changed by both Jennifer and Carstairs, with Smythe seeming to have power over their minds and other minds through the use of his glasses. This also leads to both Jennifer and Carstairs having memory problems concerning the trial as well, which leads to there being a clear connection between these memory problems and whatever power Smythe has. But there isn't much time to think about that, as the trio are proven guilty, with the Doctor and Zoe being guilty of espionage while Jamie is a deserter from the Scottish forces. They are split up, with the Doctor being placed in a cell where he is to wait until dawn for an execution, while Zoe is left in Smythe's office as she is a woman and so her punishment isn't as harsh, while Jamie is thrown into a barn where he is to wait until someone comes to collect him. This gives us our ticking clock until the cliffhanger, with Zoe trying to stage a breakout but it fails, although in the process she finds that Smythe has disappeared from his room and she finds the hidden monitor. Zoe tries to free the Doctor but gets to him too late as he is to be taken away for execution. This is a good cliffhanger, mostly due to the tone of the scene, with it having no music or really any sort of noise, with it feeling rather empty. It's just the Doctor and the few soldiers who are going to execute him. The resolution is our sniper shot of the soldiers, and this gives the Doctor a chance to escape, although it isn't the best resolution as it feels a bit too lucky, although it is the first one so I won't knock it. So episode 1 is very solid, sticking mostly to the historical setting with only a few hints towards something else going on, mostly through the hazy memories of several of the soldiers and the oddity of Smythe, with his ability to manipulate people's minds, and the monitor, which is a communication unit. Episode 2 really picks up from this though, with it giving us a lot more to sink our teeth into. This episode focuses on rescuing Jamie and then escaping from the headquarters, but by this point they have the assistance of both Jennifer and Carstairs, who are suspicious about the trial due to the oddity of it, with them both being hazy about what happened. There is of course more to this episode than just that, as there are insights into the anachronisms. The main one is the appearance of a redcoat who was found and placed in the same cell as Jamie, with him coming from 1745, with him coming from a battle between the English and the Scottish. Unfortunately he is shot while trying to escape Jamie, meaning there is little insight that is gained from him, but from what little he tells to Jamie, he found himself in the Great War after getting lost in the mist. I'll come back to this mist later, as for the moment we have another big thing which happens in the episode, as once again Smythe disappears from his room, with there being a familiar sound present. But the final few scenes of this episode are the big ones, with both Jennifer and Carstairs being convinced by the trio to help them, when taken into Smythe's room and being shown the monitor, although they can't see it at first as it's being hidden from them. But the monitor was on and Smythe was watching, causing the group to flee, with them running into the same mist that the redcoat found earlier, with them emerging on the other side to find Romans. So clearly episode 2 is a lot fuller, with plenty more happening, with the big thing being the reveal that it's not just the Great War involved in all all of this. The build-up in this episode is strong, as we get many scenes which hint towards some external power throughout until the end scene, which seems to take the group to the Roman era. Obviously there is something happening with time in this serial, although what is happening is left very ambiguous, which must have been incredibly enticing for the audience on broadcast. This is all continued on in the following episode when the group return to the Great War, where a lot of things happen, with the group raiding Smythe's office with them finding a map which reveals substantial details. So I'll talk about the map in a minute, but first I'll note this odd reference.
Whether perhaps I can pick this lock. With a tuning fork?
Yeah, a Space Pirates reference. So the map is a larger map of the area, which reveals different time zones, including the notable Great War Zone, Roman Zone and American Civil War Zone, alongside several others. Now there are two problems with this map, which aren't the most major, but I will note them now. The first being that the Great War and Roman Zones aren't actually next to each other, and so the group couldn't have passed into it as they did, and that there is no time zone that the raid code could have come from, although these could both be explained away by the map being outdated by the event of the serial, with new time zones having been added since. Either way, that means that clearly, as the serial has been hinting at, some force has been messing with time, and whatever it is clearly in the centre, which is blank. From there the group decided to head to the blank zone, but in the process are captured by the Germans. There are a few notable things that happen here. Most notably we have the first time the Doctor chooses to use the name John Smith.
I want your full name.
Oh, very well. Dr. John Smith.
Then we also get a use of a sonic screwdriver, twice over, with it being used to actually unscrew screws. This is a very clever use of a sonic, as it isn't being used just to unscrew something, it's being used to prove to the German officer that things aren't what they seem. It adds another level to the sonic in this serial, which is something which wasn't true of its previous uses, where it was a fun gimmick or then a plot device to quickly wrap things up. Although this won't be the last time we're hearing of the sonic in this serial, but the next use is still a bit off. Next we have the appearance of another person like Smythe, in this case a German officer, who uses a monocle instead of glasses to use the brain control power. This is further expansion of whoever's behind all of this, as it clearly isn't just one person. By the end of the episode the group have reunited, with them entering the American Civil War Zone. Carstairs stays behind to fend off the Americans, while the others end up trapped in a barn where a Sidrat lands, with the Doctor and Zoe going inside, giving us the cliffhanger. But more importantly is what the reveal of these machines are. So the reveal is much like the final episode of The Time Meddler, with the machines used being TARDISes, with them being named Sidrat machines. While the other hints have been small, this one changes everything, as now it means that some of the Doctor's own species is involved. The rest of the serial I'll discuss a bit less in depth before discussing singular things at the end, entirely because the remaining episodes don't introduce so many elements in each episode, and bring up questions as to what is happening, as now the episodes begin to give us answers to the mysteries it's been building up. From the beginning of episode 4, the serial starts to give answers through its new setting and fully introducing the villains, them being an unnamed species only ever referred to as the aliens. So the expanded universe has retroactively called them the Warlords, with them taking their name from their leader, but for the purposes of this I will call them the aliens, because it's funner that way. So the aliens are a powerful race who have been stealing humans from Earth's past so they can brainwash them into thinking they're fighting their wars on another planet, which is a training ground and place of experimentation for the aliens to turn them into a grand army to conquer the universe. So commanding this plan are 4 notable characters, those being the War Chief, the Security Chief, the Scientist and the Warlord. Now 3 of them are more notable than the Scientist, although he plays an important role as he is the one who develops the technology for brainwashing humans. I'll begin by covering the Scientist as he has the smallest role. So the Scientist only appears in a few episodes, with him being a sort of middle ground between the War Chief and the Security Chief, with no immediate allegiance to either of them, as his only focus through the serial is perfecting the technology they use. The Scientist is also used for many comedic scenes with the Doctor, notably doing with the fact that the Doctor is far smarter than he is and so is able to improve on the machine, plus several scenes in which the Scientist is unaware of the fact that the Doctor is a wanted man. These scenes give us a bit of levity against the action, while also working well to explain the brainwashing aspect, and that the aliens are reaching a level where they'll soon be able to have full power over the soldiers' minds. With the Scientist in the middle ground of his 2 superiors, he is swayed over to the side of the Security Chief to keep an eye on the War Chief, due to the Security Chief's lack of trust in him. Speaking of the Security Chief, let's get on to him. So the Security Chief is in charge of the security of the aliens project, with him managing the guards and being the one who interrogates the prisoners, with notable interrogations of both the Doctor and Zoe. He is opposed to the War Chief as he doesn't trust him, as he is unaware of where his allegiances truly lie, while nobody else has any doubts about him, with even the Warlord himself putting his full faith in him. The somewhat constant squabbling between the 2 chiefs is a highlight of the serial, as both of them want full control of the project, but neither can get it. The Security Chief is basically the only thing holding the War Chief back from taking full control and vice versa, so having them treating the other with utter contempt makes them both thoroughly enticing to watch, both of them holding back information from each other, and trying to make out that all the problems which have developed are the fault of the other, with it being that both of them have been making considerable mistakes. Although the War Chief is definitely the worst in terms of allowing the situation to get out of control, as it works for his own advantage. Eventually the Security Chief does get the proof he needs against the War Chief, but the dynamic reaches its conclusion with the death of the Security Chief at the hands of the War Chief towards the end of episode 9. Next we have the Warlord, who is the leader of the aliens. He has a limited screen presence, with him only being spoke about in the earlier episodes before bringing himself to the foreground in the last few, when he takes full control due to the failings of both his subordinates. So the Warlord doesn't do much himself, although he does create a plan which manages to capture the Doctor and retrieve the prototype of the new brainwashing device. Most of the time he's standing around telling the other two chiefs off for their failings, although not doing a whole lot to fix the situation himself, but he is very important in the final few episodes when he's basically all that's left. While he is somewhat presented as the big boss that the heroes have to defeat, he doesn't really feel that way for the most part, with him feeling a lot smaller than the serial perhaps wants you to believe, mostly due to his lack of doing anything or actually interacting with the heroes until the very end of episode 9. This isn't to say the Warlord isn't a strong character, but compared to the two chiefs, he isn't anywhere near as fleshed out, which does really hinder him as a villain. He does play a big part in the final episode, which does a good job of showing his importance to his own species, but I'll talk about that later. So let's get on to the heroes now, and to do that we need to discuss what they're doing during the second half of the serial. In this section they attempt to unite the many rebel forces throughout the many zones, so that they can launch an attack on the aliens. This all begins with Jennifer and Jamie becoming prisoners of the Americans before being saved by the resistance group. This leads to a few things, notably the unceremonial writing out of Jennifer, who just sort of gets sidelined at the end of episode 5. So I'll talk more about this in Jennifer's section, but basically, since she's a nurse, she's sent by new character Russell to go and treat his injured soldiers, with her never showing up again. But as I said before, I'll talk more about that later. So now let's get on to discussing the Resistance leaders and what impact they have on the serial. So there's really only two main ones, those being Russell and Arturo Villa, who is a Mexican character in the late 60s. I'll talk about Arturo Villa first, as he's the lesser of the two, and I just want to get him out of the way because he feels very problematic. So Arturo is a leader of the biggest resistance group, with it mostly consisting of bandits and criminals, with him having to be persuaded to join the others, and is still very against the idea of it once he does, with him having no trust in anyone. He does feel like he's about to stab all of them in the back at any moment for his own gain, which doesn't happen, but he never fully works with them and feels far more of an antagonistic force while he's on screen, with him basically having no redeeming qualities. There is something funny about him though, that being this line.
I need my guns, they good guns, never miss.
Which is only funny because this is actually true, as twice in the serial he kills people who are nowhere near where he is aiming. This is so stupid and just clearly because the actor was not bothering to aim his guns properly. Russell on the other hand is a lot better, partly due to him having more screen time, but also because he is English. So Russell is the first resistance leader we meet, with him being introduced in episode 5. He's the one responsible for getting rid of Jennifer, but at the same time he is the only one keeping Arturo and the other resistance members in check. He's not the greatest of characters ever, but he does play his part in the story, with him being involved in a lot of the final conflicts. He also puts a lot of trust in Zoe and Carstairs during the latter few episodes, which is what allows them to bring the resistance together and get into the aliens' command. Quite often Russell acts more as a face of the resistance rather than a character in his own right, but that works for the serial, as it doesn't really have the opportunity to really develop Russell. It just allows him to feel like a character even though he's quite basic. Now for the purpose of the resistance, this does feel like the most padding out element of the script, with the gathering of the forces really feeling like the most useless element, since at the end only the leaders are invited to the central zone. Now obviously to get all the leaders together this element has to be present, but compared with a lot of the other stuff in the script it does feel a bit redundant. But this part of the serial does give us some ideas which are quite interesting, notably how the Doctor uses the mist against the aliens, alongside the many character moments we get in these bits. Of course the size of the resistance once united isn't really shown, with only a few people around who are mostly from Russell's group. That isn't that disappointing given how the plotline resolves itself, but the build-up feels a bit of a waste of time because of this, with basically all the leaders being nothing characters. Even once the resistance leaders reach the central zone, they don't end up doing a whole lot, with them basically being a large group who can hold the command room. Perhaps the best bit of this plotline is the attacks they stage on the many command areas in the different zones, with small groups attacking and destroying the communication unit in order to bring out all the guards from the central zone, so that they can launch an attack. It's a nice mix of pre-film sequences and studio footage, showing the many commanders being killed and the alien leadership struggling to keep up with the destruction until the Warlord makes it clear how stupid the security chief and war chief have been, as they are falling for this ploy. This does a great job at seeing how powerful the resistance is once it's been united, and just how inefficient the two chiefs are during this sort of rising up by the humans. This is really the only thing that the resistance add to the serial, and it's good, but it does feel like the build-up to it made it feel like it would have been a bigger event. The resistance plotline reaches its conclusion when they're all brought to the central zone, and the Doctor seems to betray them. So before wrapping things up, let's talk about Jennifer, Carstairs, the main trio and the war chief. So beginning with Jennifer, she is a very strong female character, and despite the length of this serial, the only one outside of Zoe. She is the one who convinces Carstairs to help the trio towards the beginning and pushes things along a bit, with her being the one responsible for causing distractions to help with their escape. Plus I really like the idea of her being a nurse in the war, as it makes her stand out against the soldiers, and allows her to have more prominence than she might have had otherwise. The biggest problem with Jennifer though is her sudden write-out, as I've mentioned, with her just disappearing halfway through for reasons which aren't the greatest. This was something decided by the director, as Dix and Hulk had written her into the last few scripts, but removed her when it was decided that she wasn't needed. This is unfortunate, as her dynamic with Carstairs is a great one, and the fact that they don't reunite at any point after its capture is incredibly disappointing. Speaking of Carstairs, he is far more prominent, with him appearing throughout and getting a lot to do, including being reprocessed by the aliens, with him nearly killing Zoe. Due to his prominence in the serial and its length, it means that there is plenty of time for him to be quite well rounded. I mentioned how he was persuaded by Jennifer to help the Doctor and others, but he himself was a lot more sympathetic to them than others early on. Then once he's helping them, he's thrown into the deep end, with him going through a lot. He is also one of the most mixed towards the end when it seems the Doctor has betrayed them. He's also a crack shot, with him getting several kills in the serial when he's standing his ground to protect the others while they're escaping in the American Civil War zone. Of course he has a strong dynamic with Jennifer, which doesn't get a final scene as the last time they see each other is towards the end of episode 3, where it seems he may have been about to get killed. The lack of ending to this pair's story is definitely a disappointment, especially since they would almost certainly never see each other again, and even if they do, they'd have no memories of the serial's events. But perhaps the most tragic thing about Carstairs is that since he's a soldier, there's the potential that he may not even survive the war once he's sent back at the end. It's tragic to think that he may soon die with no memories of the adventures he had or the people he met. Now for Jamie. This serial does a good job at showing off his strength by having the more action-oriented moments towards the beginning, then later showing his trust in the Doctor when he seemingly betrayed them all. His dynamics with the others are on full display, which are as strong as ever, with plenty of humorous moments. I've already mentioned the tuning fork bit, but throughout there are plenty of moments which show how close he and the Doctor have become over their travels. There's good moments with Zoe too, but these are far fewer and far between. The best of their moments is when Jamie has to act up as the leader of the Resistance, but Zoe is doing all the talking for him. Zoe likewise is used greatly by the serial, with her spending a chunk of time with just the Doctor. It means that they get to bond a bit more over this adventure, but when they're later separated, it means that she gets to stand on her own. I've already mentioned her scene with Jamie where he's playing up as the leader, but I want to note that she is the one responsible for the Resistance being able to unite all the Resistance groups, as it was her with her great memory who was able to identify all of the leaders from her interrogation where she was shown several photographs. Then obviously we have her attempted breakout with the Doctor, which goes wrong, but she chose her being quite brave as she tried to steal the keys and get him out before it was too late. It's a good serial for Zoe, with her getting a good chance to show off her abilities, and with this being her final serial, it means that this is the end of her journey to get in touch with her human side, which while I think this was something the season never really stuck to, by the end she is a lot more human than she was in her first serial. She was clearly changed by her travels, which makes her ending all the more sad. Now we have the Doctor, who I will sort of be combining with the War Chief here, as it's hard to discuss one without the other here. So as per usual, the Doctor is great, with one of his best scenes being in episode 2 where he's pretending to be checking on the prisoners, and we really get to see Troughton go all in with a presence which his incarnation doesn't really use. It's unique for him. We don't get much of him underplaying his intelligence, but I don't think that the serial needs it, as the enemy he's facing aren't as likely to fall for it, with them also being not what they seem. There isn't a sense of the Doctor being in control of what's going on, with him being on the back foot for one reason or another. This is where I have to bring up the War Chief. As to go any further into the Doctor's place in the serial, I have to discuss him too, and I'll begin with this clip.
You may have changed your appearance, but I know who you are.
Throughout the serial, there have been hints towards who the War Chief is, with him not being one of the aliens and is revealed to be one of the Doctor's own species. In a similar vein to the monk, the War Chief is a renegade from the Doctor's own people, with plans to use their power to change the universe. But unlike the monk, his plans aren't to better the universe, instead to rule it. Using the technology of his own people, the War Chief took the knowledge to the aliens so that he could use them to do his dirty work, with plans to use humanity as an army to take over the universe. So this of course proves the security chief's suspicions right, and it's a conversation between the War Chief and the Doctor which gave him the evidence he needed. This conversation is one of the best moments in the entire serial. It's episode 8 and it confirms a significant amount about the Doctor and his origins, with revealing he's a renegade from his own people. This conversation really opens up a potential history between the two of them, with the War Chief seemingly recognising the Doctor, noting his change in appearance. This is interesting because it adds to the idea that the Doctors of people are able to recognise each other even after undergoing the renewal process. There is also a later scene which indicates that the Doctor is the older one, referring to the advancements of the SIDRAP machines as being something impossible back in his day. These scenes are complete gold, and it's such an eye-opening moment for the audience as they finally get to see more of the Doctor than has ever been shown before. The War Chief even compared the two of them being similar, with him saying he can join him and the two of them can conquer the universe together. This is why the Doctor later betrays the others, as this is a ploy to get them into the command centre. There is a bit more to talk about with these two, but I'll discuss it in a bit as it plays into wrapping up the plot. For now I need to discuss why humanity was selected as the specimens for the experiment. Now from a production perspective, because it was cheap, to have a humanoid race, and by having it be humans it does create a relatable aspect to them without needing to explore the species. But from a story perspective it's far more interesting. So Hawke is a writer who uses political themes and ideas in his scripts to discuss the state of the world and ideas in his story, which is something which will be more pronounced in his next few serials. And so the choice of it being humanity is a part of his commentary in this serial. As explained by the War Chief, humanity is a war-loving race, one of the most deadly in existence. Now this is clearly him saying something about the human race, and it's not a subtle message. So obviously this bit of the serial is talking about humanity's somewhat natural ability to create destruction and begin wars. It's not the most fleshed out element, but it's always there once the idea has been introduced, although quite late in the game. But on later rewatches, it's something you begin to think about as you watch the scenes of the trio stuck in these wars and running for their lives. So I want to talk about a few more minor bits of the serial, notably the sonic and other details. So I've mentioned the use of the sonic screwdriver, with it being used as a screwdriver, but this serial uses it multiple times, with it being used as the power source so the Doctor can remove a section of the wall from its magnetic field, and then to dismantle the machine controlling the mist, so he could use it as a defence. This really expands the sonic's uses and what it can do in a way which we haven't seen as of yet, and we really don't see this general use of the sonic in the classic era that much either. Next is the Sidrats. So Sidrats are obviously TARDISes, with them having been altered, notably with the addition of remote controls so they can be operated from the command centre. The other notable feature the Doctor notes is the dimensional flexibility, which is presumably him referencing the control over the inner dimensions, which the War Chief uses to try and crush the Doctor and company in episode 6. Interestingly, this feature is referred to as the dimensional control, which is the same name as the piece of the monk's TARDIS which the Doctor removed to shrink its inner dimensions, which means that this is either a coincidence or purposeful homage, but given the era, it's more likely the former. One final thing I want to talk about before wrapping up the plot is the War Chiefs in the monologue, something the show has only done once before with the Doctors in the monologue in the Moon Base. This is the serial's earliest hint towards the War Chief's interest in the Doctor.
Time travelers, I wonder.
We also need to address the War Chief's death, as following his betrayal of the aliens, he escapes from the Resistance and confronts the Warlord who orders his guards to kill him. It's not an especially horrific death, but the performance makes it powerful. So to wrap up the plot, this is where I have to begin talking about what I've been putting off, what the serial has been building to. With this serial featuring another member of the Doctor's own race, this serial spends time building up that race with many references to the Doctor's own people, including them finally being given a name, of Time Lords.
Are you suggesting he's bringing in his own people? The Time Lords?
Yes, the first mention of the Time Lords in the show is by two random people with no real build-up. Something you would not see nowadays, where it would be depicted as the most important thing ever. This build-up is all leading to the resolution of the plot, as the Sivrat machines have all reached the end of their lives due to their modifications, leaving them unable to return everyone to their own time, leaving the Doctor with only one option, to summon the Time Lords. Despite everything the Doctor has gone through, the many dangers and enemies he has faced before, this is the first that pushes him to risk himself by calling in the Time Lords to sort things out. This leads to the Doctor running for his life at the end, with the trio fleeing in the TARDIS across time and space, but it's all in vain, with the TARDIS being captured and returned to the home planet.
You have returned to us, Doc. Your travels are over.
This gives us the final episode, which is set entirely on the Time Lord's home planet, and finally introduces the people the Doctor has been hiding from. This final episode is mostly separate from the rest of the serial, but wraps things up with the Time Lords putting the Warlord on trial for his crimes, with the Doctor's testimony being used against him. This entire scene is perfect, as it introduces both the Time Lords and makes them terrifying. They are so composed and well spoken, but clearly possess incredible power, as when the Warlord resists, they use their power against him. Despite this, the Warlord doesn't fear them, instead tries to escape using the Doctor's TARDIS, having two Time Lord engineers killed in the process. But this plan fails and the Time Lords enact justice, sealing the aliens' home planet off from the rest of the universe, and removing the Warlord from existence. This first chunk of the episode really sets up the power of the Time Lords and makes them scary, with them having this godlike presence which really reinforces the fact that the Doctor isn't allowed to leave, with him having to face his own trial, something his companions don't understand. The Doctor's trial itself is very simple, with it consisting of the Doctor being unable to change the minds of the Time Lords, who from the beginning seem to have made up their minds about the outcome. The Doctor's defence consists of him talking about the evils of the universe, and accuses the Time Lords of sitting around and not using their great power to intervene and protect the weaker races, declaring himself to be proud of his actions. A part of this consists of him showing some of the villains he has defeated, including the Quarks, Yeti, Ice Warriors, Cybermen and the Daleks. Despite this, he ultimately loses, and so must face punishment. But before we get onto that, we have to say goodbye to Jamie and Zoe. This goodbye scene is very powerful, made more powerful by the fact that it's forced upon them, with the two of them not giving up and wanting to try and escape. And although they convince the Doctor to tag along, he knows it's pointless, and seems to only be doing it for them. Once they reach the TARDIS, they are taken away to be returned to their own times. This goodbye is made more tragic by the fact that when the two of them return to their times, their memories are erased of the Doctor, with each only remembering their first adventure. So the Highlanders for Jamie and the Wheel in Space for Zoe. This means that for both of them, the growth that they went through will almost certainly have been removed by this. But for Jamie it's perhaps more tragic, as he now no longer remembers Zoe and Victoria, two of his closest friends during his travels. This aspect makes their departures even more saddening than all those before, as they don't remember the adventures they had, and the people they both met and became during them. Finally, we have the Doctor's verdict, which is the Doctor is guilty and therefore his punishment is to be sent to Earth in exile, with his knowledge of the TARDIS removed and a new face. The Doctor gets to choose from a selection, but being picky doesn't like any of them, and so a new face is forced upon him, with the face not being revealed and the serial ending during the renewal process. Well, I say renewal because is this still technically a renewal like the previous one? Either way, with this the Triton era reaches its conclusion. The Doctor here is incredibly strong, with him not playing the fool at all and instead being incredibly defiant. He knows how futile his efforts are and will be, but despite that he does not back down as he shuns them for his own actions. This is what the best performances Triton gave during his era, with it being a strong one to go out on. So with a serial this long, we have quite a few things to talk about with the behind the scenes. So let's start with the actors, as there are several who have been in the show before. So we have the War Chief, who was played by Edward Brayshaw, who had previously played Leon in the Reign of Terror. Then Philip Maddock, who appeared earlier in this season in the Crotons, with Maddox growing a beard to make him less recognisable for the audience. Then we have the first Time Lord, who was played by Bernard Horsfall, who had also appeared earlier in this season in The Mind Robber. Finally, we have the character of Moore, played by David Troughton, who previously appeared and credited in The Enemy of the World, but was also notable for being the son of Patrick Troughton. Next I want to talk about the music, as this serial has quite a good score, but the one thing I want to note is the unique themes for the different zones. While we only see a few zones, each is given its own piece of music, which helps to identify it, with them all being very distinctive. This is a subtle thing, but I think it works well to help establish the setting and set them apart from each other a little, even though I think the American Civil War Zone one is only used once. Now for the location choose, as there are two interesting things about it. Notably, I want to talk about how distressing it was for Troughton. Due to the Great War scenes being filmed in a rubbish dump, there were rats all over the place, and this seriously distressed Troughton, to the point that he threatened to quit on the spot if he saw another. This was later revealed to be due to his time during the war, where he was put on rat shooting duty. Then we have the explosions, which is a two-part thing. First we have a near miss for the main cast. So while filming these scenes there were many large explosions as we know, but there was one large one in particular being set up, and Troughton asked to see a demonstration to get an idea of what it would be like before they filmed the take. It did take a bit of convincing, but the demonstration went underway, and the explosion launched a large piece of rock into the air and it landed right where the trio were meant to be standing. Obviously a situation which could have ended in tears if Troughton hadn't been insistent. Then we have the actual guy in charge of the pyrotechnics. So in preparation for filming, he brought a considerable number of pyrotechnics with him, but by the end of filming he still had a truckload left. And as told by Fraser Hines, as the cast and crew left, the guy set off all the explosives he had left, causing the entire area to erupt into a massive explosion of garbage that filled the sky. So that's the War Games, a massive serial which, despite not being the longest serial so far, it's far better written with arcs and characters who remain both consistent and important. Although the show hadn't exactly been building up to this serial, it definitely is the end of the long-running mystery of the Doctor. This serial does have the reputation of being 9 episodes and then the Time Lord show up. That doesn't even come close to properly describing it though, as those 9 episodes show the trio's final journey together and fighting against one of the biggest threats the show has ever given us. The final conclusion is one of the saddest in the show's history, with every familiar face leaving us on unwanted terms. This serial is in just about every way the end of many eras, the Troughton era, the Black and White era, and the era of the mystery of the Doctor. But while it has closed all those doors, the show is ready to open new ones, with a new Doctor who is still faceless, but ready to take over and begin his exile on Earth.